Chicago on December 24th, cut like a blade. Wind whipped across the plaza outside Union Station and slapped every exposed cheek until eyes watered whether you wanted them to or not. Daniel Price pulled his overcoat collar higher and tightened his grip on his daughter's small hand. Emma was 8, wrapped in a blue knit scarf, her mother's scarf. Daniel hated how the holidays dragged memories back like hooks in skin. Emma didn't hate them. She just missed what she'd lost. "Come on, Em," Daniel said, voice low and tired. "The car's waiting." Emma didn't answer. She stopped so suddenly Daniel's arm jerked. Against the stone wall, a woman was curled on a bench like she was trying to disappear into it. Her head hung forward. On her chest was a thin blanket bundle, crumpled and damp with snow. If Daniel hadn't heard the faint, rattling breath, he would have thought it was trash, something forgotten in the cold. "Daddy." Emma tugged his hand hard enough to sting. "There's a baby." Daniel's eyes flicked away on instinct, an old reflex from a life where sob stories turned into lawsuits and kindness came with a receipt. He started to pull Emma along. Then she whispered again, each word landing like a hammer. "Daddy, the baby's cold." Daniel looked down at her. Emma's cheeks were red from the wind. She wasn't asking for a toy or a detour. She was asking him to do the right thing. He exhaled a white cloud and lifted his gaze. Above the bench, a security camera blinked, tiny red light, steady as a heartbeat. Someone was watching. A guard, a control room, an entire system. Daniel crouched, removed one glove and brushed his fingers against the baby's cheek through the blanket. Ice cold. Lips tinged purple. He turned to Emma. "Give me your scarf." Emma yanked it off without hesitation. No complaint, no pause. Daniel draped it over the bundle, tucking it in like he could shelter the baby from the whole city. Then he set his hand lightly on the woman's shoulder. "Ma'am," he said, calm but firm, "you can't sleep out here." She snapped awake like she'd been ripped from a nightmare, both arms clamped around the bundle. Her eyes were bloodshot, wild with fear and suspicion. "Don't touch my baby!" she rasped, voice shredded by cold. Daniel raised both hands, palms out. "I'm not taking him. I'm keeping him from freezing." She shook her head, teeth chattering hard. "Men like you don't help for free." Daniel held her gaze. "I'm not buying your story." He paused, then said the line that surprised even him. "I'm buying you time, so your baby survives tonight." At that moment, a security guard stepped out of the station, stared at the bench, then locked eyes with Daniel. He lifted his radio, tense. "Sir, the outside camera caught something. Someone was chasing her about 10 minutes ago." And right there in the wind, the guard started rewinding the footage in front of them. Her name was Lena Parker, 44, and she used to start every morning before sunrise in a beige scrub top, hair pinned up, packing lunches for other people's parents at St. Bridget's Family Clinic. Even after her own life collapsed, the habit stayed. Take care of someone else first. Tonight, she'd taken care of Miles the only way she still could, by keeping him alive. She hadn't fallen asleep on that bench. She'd folded herself around her baby like a shield until her muscles finally quit. The cold worked in layers. First numb fingers, then burning ears, then that dangerous calm that whispers, "It's fine to rest." She knew that calm. She feared it more than hunger. When the man's hand touched her shoulder, she woke on instinct like a cornered animal. A rich coat, clean gloves, the scent of winter cologne. Everything in her screamed, trap. People didn't kneel in slush for women like her unless there was a price. And the scarf, soft, warm, was wrapped around Miles. The little girl beside him had eyes too honest to be acting. Lena saw the child's bare neck and felt shame cut through her panic. She hated herself for the first thought she'd had. They're stealing him. Because the second thought was worse. What if they're the only reason he lives through the night? "Don't touch my baby," she'd snapped, but her voice shook, not from anger, from fear. Miles coughed, tiny, wet, wrong, and the sound ripped her in half. She pressed her cheek to his forehead, still cold, still too cold. Lena's whole world narrowed to simple math. One baby, one night, no shelter beds left, no cash, and one stranger offering warmth. She'd learned to distrust help the hard way, but she'd also learned what happens when pride wins and your child loses. In her coat pocket, her phone buzzed. No service half the time, but the battery still had a cruel sense of timing. A missed call. No name, just a number she knew by muscle memory. Her stomach dropped. She'd blocked it. She'd changed settings. It didn't matter. He always found a way. Lena looked up and caught the security guard's face as he stared at the rewinding screen, brow furrowed, lips tight, like he recognized the man chasing her in the footage. Daniel Price's voice was calm, but his eyes flicked to her phone. "Is someone looking for you?" Lena swallowed, hugging Miles tighter. "Yes," she whispered. "And if he finds us, he won't stop at me." Her phone buzzed again, one message. "Bring my son back tonight, or I'll tell them what you did." Lena wasn't on that bench because she didn't try. She was there because every door that should have opened for a working mother had been slammed in her face, by policy, by paperwork, and by one man who knew exactly how to trap her without ever laying a hand on her in public. 6 months ago, she still had an apartment and a badge on a lanyard that read St. Bridget's Family Clinic. Then Miles came early, 2 months early, after a night that started with one shove against a kitchen counter and ended in an ambulance she didn't want to call. The NICU kept her baby breathing. The hospital kept sending bills that looked like phone books. Her insurance lapsed when she missed too many shifts, and when she tried to return, her supervisor told her quietly that a messy home situation made the clinic nervous. She could have moved in with her mother, if her mother would answer. Lena had grown up in a strict, church-first house where divorce was shame and asking for help meant you failed God. The last voicemail from her mom was still saved, like a bruise she kept pressing. "I love you, but I won't lie for you. Don't bring that chaos here." So Lena bounced between shelters and friends until the friends stopped picking up. Not because they were cruel, but because fear is contagious. One false rumor, one angry man showing up at their door, one threat about child protective services, and suddenly even kind people chose distance. And her ex, Miles's father, used the system like a weapon. He didn't want the baby. He wanted control. He knew Lena had no stable address. He knew she'd missed appointments. He knew she'd sign anything to avoid losing her son. Every few days a new message arrived from a different number, always the same tone. "Bring him back or I'll tell them you're unfit. Tell them you stole him. Tell them you're homeless." The worst part? He had money, and money buys credibility. In her tote bag, Lena kept 3 things like holy relics. Miles's birth certificate in a plastic sleeve, the last eviction notice, and a crumpled hospital statement stamped "Past due" in red. She'd shown that statement to a shelter intake worker 2 days ago. The woman's eyes softened. Then she pointed to the line on the form. "No infants after 9 p.m. Fire code." Tonight, Lena had counted the hours like beads on a rosary. Stay awake. Keep him warm. Make it to morning. But now the security guard was rewinding video, and Lena's phone was vibrating again, the threat pulsing in her palm like a heartbeat she couldn't stop. On the screen, a familiar figure leaned into the frame, her ex's face clear as day, while the guard muttered, Ma'am, he's still outside. The security office inside Union Station smelled like burnt coffee and wet wool. A wall of monitors showed every doorway, every corridor, every slice of the city that believed it was anonymous. The guard, Martinez, according to his name tag, paused the footage on a frame that made Lena's stomach turn. A man in a dark beanie had been tailing her from the escalators, keeping just far enough back to look like a stranger. Then, right before she collapsed onto the bench, he stepped close, grabbed her tote strap, and hissed something into her ear. Lena couldn't hear the words, but she remembered the pressure of his fingers and the way he'd smiled, like he owned her. Daniel Price leaned in, expression hardening. He didn't touch Lena, didn't crowd her. He stood just to her left so she could still see the exit. "You said he's still outside," he told Martinez. Martinez nodded. "He's pacing near the rideshare lane. Keeps looking at the camera like he wants us to notice him." Lena hugged Miles tighter, feeling the baby's warmth finally returning under Emma's scarf. Her hands were still shaking, but now the shake had a target, fear, with a face. Daniel glanced at Emma. The girl sat on a metal chair, feet swinging, eyes locked on the screen like she was memorizing it for later. In her lap was Daniel's wedding ring. He wore it on a chain during the holidays, a habit he didn't talk about. Tonight it flashed in the monitor's glare, a reminder of promises and how quickly life could rip them apart. "We're leaving through staff access," Daniel decided. "My driver's 2 blocks over, no crowd." Martinez grabbed a radio. "I'll escort, and I'm saving this clip. Timestamp, camera ID, everything." They moved fast through a service corridor that opened behind the station's holiday pop-up market. Christmas music floated in, cheerful, oblivious, while Lena counted each step like a lifeline. Daniel's SUV waited by a loading dock under a sodium light. The driver, an older man with a calm face, unlocked the rear door without asking questions. Inside the warm car, Lena finally let her shoulders drop a fraction. Emma scooted closer and whispered, "Is your baby okay now?" Lena nodded, throat tight. "He's trying." The city blurred past the windows, twinkling storefronts, people laughing, couples holding hands, like a world Lena had once belonged to. Then the SUV turned toward a place that looked like it belonged on a postcard. The Lakeshore Grand Hotel, all glass and gold light, with a red carpet entrance and security posted for a holiday charity event. Through the lobby doors, Lena saw the giant donor wall, the glowing chandeliers, and the microphone stand on a small stage. Everything luxurious, everything public. And then she saw him. The man from the video stepped out of the crowd in a clean suit and polished shoes, hair neatly styled, a badge visitor sticker on his lapel like he'd belonged there. He lifted his hands, palms out, performing concern for anyone watching. "Officer!" he called, loud enough for heads to turn. "Thank God! You found my child!" He pointed straight at Lena as hotel guests began to gather around the microphone. His name was Grant Halloway, 46, and he had learned a long time ago that the cleanest violence left no bruises. It left paper trails. It left doubt. It left other people doing the hurting for him. Right now he stood beneath the Lakeshore Grand's chandelier glow like a man who belonged there, charity badge on his lapel, crisp suit, polished smile. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was a worried father. If you did know him, you'd recognize the performance, calm on the surface, claws underneath. Grant's real job wasn't parenting, it was controlling Lena. He'd never wanted midnight feedings or diaper runs. What he wanted was leverage, something living that could pull her back when she tried to leave. The baby was a chain he could show the world, then yank in private. He'd practiced this move for weeks. First, he made sure Lena couldn't rent anywhere stable by disputing past payments and confirming concerns to landlords. Then he called her clinic twice, posing as a relative, planting the idea she was unstable. Finally, he dangled the ultimate threat: custody. Not because he wanted Miles, because if he had Miles, Lena would have nothing. And tonight's timing wasn't an accident either. The charity event was crawling with local press, donors, board members, exactly the kind of crowd that loved a tidy story. Grant didn't need to win in court yet. He only needed to win in public. If enough respectable people believed Lena was dangerous, the system would follow the noise. Lena stood frozen near the lobby's donor wall, Miles bundled tight against her chest. Emma's scarf was still wrapped around him, and that sight made Grant's smile twitch, just for a second, before he covered it with a concerned laugh. "There you are," he called, loud enough to turn heads. "I've been frantic." Daniel stepped slightly in front of Lena, not touching her, but placing his body between her and Grant's reach. "Sir, we're not doing this in the lobby." Grant's gaze flicked to Daniel's face, sharp and appraising. Recognition sparked. Rich man, influential, dangerous to his plan. Grant adjusted instantly, switching tactics the way a salesman switches pitches. "I'm grateful you kept my child warm," Grant said, voice dripping with reasonableness. "But she kidnapped him. She's unstable. I have texts. I have proof." Lena's stomach clenched. The texts were his threats, carefully worded to look like concern if someone read them out of context. Grant always wrote like a man building an exhibit for court. He lifted his phone in the air like a badge. "Officer, security. You can't let her walk away this time." Martinez arrived at a brisk pace, eyes hard. Grant pointed at Lena, then at Miles. "That's my son. She's homeless. She's a risk." Daniel's jaw tightened. Emma grabbed his coat sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, the camera." Grant leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Daniel could hear. "You don't want your name tied to this mess," he murmured. "Let the authorities do their job." Then he turned back to the gathering guests and raised his voice again, savoring the stage he'd built. "Please," he said, "someone help me get my baby back." And as phones began to lift for recording, Grant signaled the hotel mic like he was about to make Lena's shame official. Grant didn't walk into the Lakeshore Grand alone. He never did. His power wasn't just money. It was the way he recruited respectable people to do the dirty work while he stayed clean. At his right shoulder stood a woman Lena recognized instantly, even though they'd only met once. Tessa Vaughn. Late 30s, sleek bob, pearl earrings, a badge that read Event Media. She wasn't police. She wasn't hotel staff. She was Grant's public story in human form. One of those crisis PR consultants who could turn lies into concerns and call it protecting a child. Tessa smiled at the guests gathering near the microphone, then angled her phone so the camera caught Lena's face, the baby bundle, and Daniel Price's protective stance. "We just want a peaceful reunion," she said, voice sweet enough to sound like truth. "But there are safety questions." Behind her, another man lifted a small gimbal camera, already filming in vertical format. Lena's throat tightened. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was content. Daniel's driver hovered near the entrance, tense. Martinez's hand stayed near his radio. Emma pressed close to Daniel's side, eyes wide, whispering, "Daddy, they're recording." Grant took a half step forward, palms open, the picture of patience. "Lena, please," he said loudly. "Let's not frighten Miles. Give him to me and we can talk privately." Privately. The word made Lena's skin crawl. Private meant no witnesses. Private meant his voice in her ear, calm and low, telling her what to say, what to sign, how to behave if she wanted her son fed. Lena forced her voice steady. "His name is Miles," she said, so the people closest could hear. "And you haven't asked if he's okay once." A few heads turned. A couple in formal wear exchanged a glance. For a flicker of a second, Grant's expression tightened. Annoyance, not worry. Then he smoothed it away. Tessa jumped in immediately. "Ma'am, please," she said, still smiling. "You're upset. We understand. But you're unhoused, you're unstable, and this child needs a safe environment." "We have documented concerns." "Concerns," Lena repeated, bitter. That was Grant's favorite word. It could mean anything, prove nothing, and still destroy you. Daniel's voice cut through the lobby noise. "This isn't a custody exchange," he said. "It's harassment, and it's being filmed." Grant's gaze locked on Daniel, calculating. "Then let's film the truth," he replied, turning to the crowd like a man offering fairness. "Sir, you can hand the baby to security, and everyone will see I'm the father." Martinez stiffened. "We can verify identities," he said carefully. "But we also have footage from Union Station." Tessa's smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. "Footage can be misinterpreted," she said, "and public safety comes first." Lena's phone buzzed again, another message from the same unknown number. "Do it my way,
or I'll call CPS right now."
Her knees went weak. Emma's small hand slipped into Lena's free hand like a lifeline. Then Tessa raised her own phone to the microphone and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a statement to read on behalf of the child's father." Tessa stepped up to the microphone like she belonged on that stage. The lobby's holiday music lowered automatically, and the sudden quiet felt like a spotlight. Guests in cocktail dresses and winter tuxedos formed a loose circle, phones lifted chest high, recording with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Thank you for your attention," Tessa said, voice smooth and practiced. "We're here because a child's safety is not a private matter." Lena's throat tightened. She adjusted Miles against her chest, feeling the baby's warm breath through the scarf. Emma stood close to Daniel, small fingers wrapped around his sleeve like she was bracing for impact. Grant nodded to Tessa, then turned toward the crowd with a pained expression. "I don't want drama," he said, loud enough for everyone. "But my son was taken. And this woman," he paused as if choosing mercy, "is not well." The word landed like a slap. Lena tried to speak, but her mouth went dry. She could already hear how it would sound to them. Homeless mother, trembling hands, no address, no lawyer. To this crowd, her fear looked like guilt. Tessa glanced at her phone and began reading. "Statement from Grant Halloway, the father of infant Miles Halloway. I have repeatedly requested the child's return. I have offered housing and support. The mother has refused treatment, refused stable placement, and has endangered the child by sleeping outdoors." A woman in pearls gasped softly. A man in a gray suit shook his head like he'd seen this story before. Someone whispered, "That poor baby." Grant took one step closer, still careful not to touch Lena. "Lena," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate, concerned. "Stop punishing the child because you're angry at me." Daniel's jaw flexed. "Back up," he warned. Grant spread his hands, playing victim. "See? This is what I mean. She's surrounded herself with strangers and thinks that makes her right." Tessa's smile sharpened as she added, "Ma'am, if you truly love your baby, you'll hand him over to security and cooperate. Otherwise, we'll have to assume the worst." Lena's cheeks burned, not from cold, humiliation. She pictured her old clinic co-workers seeing this clip online, strangers typing words like unfit, unstable, crazy. She pictured a caseworker's face, sympathetic, then suspicious. Emma suddenly spoke, small but clear. "She kept her baby warm. You didn't." A few heads turned. Grant's expression flickered, annoyance, then quick recovery. "Sweetheart," he said, smiling at Emma like she was a prop, "you don't know the whole story." Lena finally found her voice. "You're lying," she said, hoarse. "You didn't offer support. You offered control." Grant leaned toward Tessa, too close, too confident. Lena caught it. His whisper meant for Tessa, not the room. "Read the part about CPS. That'll make her fold." Lena's blood turned to ice, and Tessa's thumb hovered over a second page of the statement titled, "Report to Child Protective Services." Daniel lifted a hand before Tessa could scroll to the CPS section. "Stop," he said, voice even but carrying. "You're reading accusations, not facts." Grant's smile didn't move. "Facts are on my phone." "Then so are threats," Martinez cut in. The guard held up his own tablet, the Union Station security app, open. "Camera 4B, timestamp, full resolution. I saved it to the city server the moment I saw him grab her bag." A ripple went through the circle of donors. People loved a statement until someone said, "Timestamp." Phones steadied, recording again, because now it sounded like evidence, not drama. Tessa tried to regain control. "Security footage can be edited." "Not this," Martinez said. He tapped the screen. A small banner appeared. Uploaded. Case ID generated. It's auto-backed up. Daniel looked at Lena, keeping his tone low. "That bag you're carrying, what's inside?" Lena swallowed. "His birth certificate, bills, my clinic badge." She hesitated, then pulled out a folded paper, corners torn. "And this?" Daniel took it carefully. The top line read, "Petition for Emergency Custody, Draft." Grant's name sat on the header in bold legal type. The date at the bottom was 2 days ago. Grant's eyes flashed. "That's private." "Private?" Lena's voice cracked. "You printed it before you even found us!" The hotel security supervisor appeared at Martinez's side, Caroline Webb, gray hair and a tight bun, posture straight as a ruler. Her badge read, Director of Security. "Mr. Price," she said to Daniel, recognizing him, "our lobby cameras caught the gentleman arriving 15 minutes before you did. He spoke with Ms. Vaughn near the service elevator." Webb nodded to a technician who held a small receipt printer strip. "He also tried to access the ballroom AV closet with a guest badge that doesn't match our list." Tessa's face stayed pleasant, but her fingers tightened around her phone. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Grant," he said, "you walked into a charity event with a script, a camera team, and a custody petition. That's not a rescue. That's a setup." Lena felt the room tilt. For the first time, the stares weren't all aimed at her like knives. Some were turning toward Grant, searching for cracks. Webb stepped closer to Martinez. "Send me the Union Station clip," she murmured. "If his face matches our footage, I can lock the files and notify the police liaison." Martinez hit share, and the case video began uploading to the hotel's secure network. Caroline Webb didn't care about anyone's feelings. She cared about liability. Her eyes swept the crowd of donors, the raised phones, the baby in Lena's arms, and she made a decision that sounded reasonable, until Lena realized it was a cage. "We're moving this to the security conference room," Webb said. "Now, no more filming in my lobby." Tessa's smile stayed glued on. "Of course, we want privacy," she purred, like privacy hadn't been the weapon all along. Grant nodded, relieved. He wasn't backing down, he was repositioning. He wanted Lena away from the donor wall, away from the casual witnesses who might ask questions, away from the softening faces that had started to doubt him. Daniel leaned close to Lena without touching her. "Don't say anything alone," he murmured. "If they separate you, keep Martinez in the room. Keep the cameras involved." Lena tried to swallow, but her throat was tight. She could feel Miles's warm breath now, and that warmth made her even more terrified. Warm meant alive. Alive meant someone could take him. The conference room was small, windowless, and bright with harsh fluorescent lights. A wall-mounted monitor showed the hotel camera feed with a spinning loading icon. Union Station footage still syncing. Martinez stood by the door like a guard dog. Webb sat at the table, posture stiff, hands folded. Grant sat across from Lena like he was already a judge. Tessa stood behind him with her phone held low, still recording. Webb spoke first. "This is what's going to happen. Police are en route to assess. Until then, no one leaves with the infant without verification." Grant exhaled dramatically. "Thank you. That's all I've asked." Lena's hands shook. "He grabbed my bag," she said. "You saw it." "We saw a clip," Grant corrected quickly. "A clip without audio, without context. She ran, I followed. That's what fathers do." Daniel's phone buzzed. His face changed as he glanced at the screen. Through the thin wall, Lena heard muffled applause, someone announcing the next portion of the charity program. Webb's eyes flicked to Daniel. "Mr. Price, you're on in 2 minutes. This event is your name." Daniel looked at Lena, conflict sharp in his expression. "I'll be right outside," he promised. "Emma stays with me. Martinez stays with you." Grant's voice dropped, just for Lena. "See, even he won't burn his reputation for you." When Daniel stepped out, the room felt colder even under fluorescent light. Lena tightened her hold on Miles. Tessa angled her camera slightly higher. Webb slid a single-page form across the table toward Lena, and a pen followed it like a weapon. "This is a temporary safety plan," Webb said. "It allows the father to take the infant to the on-site medic for evaluation while police verify identity. If you refuse, we may have to treat this as a child endangerment incident." Lena stared at the words, "temporary consent to transfer custody," her vision blurring. Grant pushed the pen closer and whispered, "Sign it, or I make the call that takes him from you forever." Lena stared at the consent form until the words blurred. Temporary. Transfer. Evaluation. In her head, it translated to one sentence. Hand him over, and hope you ever see him again. "I'm his mother," she said, voice shaking. "I'm not signing away my baby." Grant's expression stayed calm, but his eyes sharpened. "Then you're choosing pride over his health," he said, loud enough for Webb to hear. "Write it down." Webb didn't look at Grant. She looked at the clock on the wall, then at Martinez. "If the infant needs medical assessment and the mother refuses cooperation, we have an emergency," she said. "I will not risk a tragedy in my building." Martinez's jaw tightened. "We have video of him grabbing her," he insisted. "Union Station. Case ID already created." "And police will review it," Webb replied, clipped. "But right now, I need the baby checked by the on-site medic. That's standard." Tessa's phone was still rolling. Lena saw the red dot recording and felt her stomach drop. Every tremor in her hands would be turned into a caption. Every crack in her voice would become unstable. Grant pushed back his chair and stood. "Since she won't cooperate privately," he said, "we'll do this the proper way, in public, with witnesses." Before Lena could react, Grant opened the conference room door. The hallway outside was buzzing, music, chatter, the charity program moving on like nothing mattered more than donations and speeches. Grant led the way straight toward the ballroom entrance, Tessa at his shoulder like a shadow. "No," Lena whispered, but Webb was already signaling hotel security. 2 guards stepped in, not rough, just firm, forming a gentle wall around Lena and the baby. "Ma'am," one guard said, "we need to relocate to the medic station." They emerged into the lobby at the exact moment Daniel Price stepped onto the small stage, microphone in hand. He was mid-sentence, something about community and second chances, when he saw Lena surrounded by security, Miles bundled in a child's scarf, and Grant standing like a hero. Grant reached for the mic stand at the edge of the stage and spoke over Daniel's event voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced. "I need help. This woman kidnapped my son." A wave of gasps hit the lobby. Phones rose higher. Someone muttered, "Call the police." Another whispered, "That poor man." Emma's face crumpled. She grabbed Daniel's coat chain where his wedding ring hung and clung like it was an anchor. Lena's knees went weak. "He's lying," she tried to say, but her words drowned in the crowd's hunger for a simple villain. The medic approached with a rolling cart, reaching gently. "Ma'am, I just need to check his temperature." Lena tightened her arms around Miles. "Please," she begged, eyes burning.
"Please don't take him."
Then a woman in a navy gown stepped forward from the donor circle and said, "Stop, your concerned father was threatening her outside Union Station." The woman in the navy gown didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice cut clean through the lobby like a judge's gavel. "I was at Union Station," she said, chin lifted, eyes steady. "I watched that man corner her near the rideshare lane. He wasn't worried. He was angry. He grabbed her bag and threatened her." For half a second the crowd froze, caught between two stories. Then the whispers started, multiplying like sparks. "Did she really take the baby? Is that guy lying? Why is Mr. Price involved?" Phones stayed up, but the angles changed. Some turned off Lena and swung toward Grant, hunting for a reaction. Grant's face tightened, just a flicker, before he forced a laugh that sounded too light. "Ma'am, you're mistaken," he said. "This is a private family matter. I'm begging for my child." The navy gown woman didn't flinch. "I'm not mistaken. I'm Dr. Renee Callahan, pediatric ER. I know what fear looks like, and I know what control looks like." That title, doctor, landed in the room with weight. A few donors straightened, a few looked embarrassed, but not all of them. Some people didn't want facts. They wanted the comfort of judging the right person. Caroline Webb stepped forward, palms out. "Enough. We are not trying this case in my lobby," she said, sharp. "The police are on their way. Until then, everyone needs to back up." Hotel security widened the circle. The medic hovered, uncertain. Martinez stood at Lena's side, protective but tense, like he knew the system could still turn ugly. Lena's cheeks burned. She could feel every stare, every pause before someone decided whether she deserved mercy. She shifted Miles higher on her chest, fighting the instinct to shrink. She wouldn't give Grant the satisfaction of seeing her fold. Emma clung to Daniel's coat sleeve as he stepped off the stage, microphone still in his hand. The wedding ring on his chain flashed once under the chandelier, and Lena hated that her life had spilled onto someone else's sacred memory. "Lena," Daniel said quietly, "stay with Martinez. Don't move." Grant raised his voice again, louder, polishing his performance. "She's manipulating you all," he said. "Look at her. She can't even stand. That baby needs stability." Stability. The word hit Lena like a bruise. She had been stable once. A job, a home, a badge on a lanyard. Now she was a headline waiting to happen. She reached for her tote bag, the one with Miles's birth certificate and the hospital bills, just to ground herself. Her fingers found nothing. Her stomach dropped. She looked down. The strap that had been on her shoulder was gone. The bag was gone. And across the circle, Tessa Vaughn calmly slid a familiar tote into Grant's waiting hand, as if returning property to its rightful owner. Lena opened her mouth to scream, then realized the birth certificate was now in Grant's pocket. The moment Lena saw her tote in Grant's hand, her lungs forgot how to work. The lobby's glittering lights smeared into a haze. Martinez moved fast, guiding her sideways through a staff door before the crowd could surge. Miles stirred against her chest, sensing her panic. In the service corridor, the air smelled like bleach and warm bread from the kitchen. Lena's knees threatened to fold. "Bathroom," she whispered. Webb pointed down the hall without softness, but Martinez stayed close, one hand up like a shield as footsteps and whispers followed. The women's restroom was empty, too bright, too clean. She locked herself into a stall and sat on the closed lid, Miles still bundled in Emma's scarf. His tiny fingers flexed. Lena pressed her forehead to the metal divider and listened to her own breathing, ragged and loud. Tears came anyway, hot and humiliating. She wiped them with the edge of her sleeve and forced her voice into her head like a command. "I'm done begging." She checked Miles's mouth, pink now, not blue, then kissed his hair, a silent promise that she would not hand him over for anyone's comfort. Her mind snapped into inventory the way it used to in triage. She had no birth certificate now, no clinic badge, no address, but she did have a case ID on Martinez's tablet, a doctor who'd spoken up, and hotel cameras that recorded Grant arriving early. Evidence existed, real, dated, backed up. A knock hit the stall door. "Lena, it's Martinez," came the low voice. "Police just pulled up, and Mr. Price is demanding the lobby cameras be preserved." Lena steadied herself, lifted Miles higher, and stood. In the mirror, her face looked older than 44, but her eyes were awake. When she stepped back into the corridor, the muffled roar of the lobby hit her again, people talking over each other, someone laughing nervously, someone else crying. Webb's radio crackled. "He's showing the bag," a guard said. "He's telling everyone she has no documents, no proof she's the mother." Lena's phone vibrated in her pocket, a sick, familiar buzz. Unknown number. One photo loaded. Her son's birth certificate on a marble countertop, Grant's hand in the corner. Then a message. "Loading dock, 5 minutes. Come alone, or I hand him to CPS on camera." And Lena realized the trap wasn't over. It was moving. Police entered the Lakeshore Grand lobby in 2 dark uniforms, followed by a woman in a county jacket with a clipboard. Grant straightened, relief painted on his face. "That's her," he announced, holding up Lena's tote like a trophy. "She ran with my son. I'm begging you, please." Officer Halverson asked for IDs. Grant produced a driver's license and, with a flourish, the birth certificate he'd stolen. Lena's pockets held only a dead prepaid card, a cracked phone, and a hospital wristband she'd forgotten to remove. "Ma'am, do you have identification?" the officer asked. My documents were in that bag," Lena said, voice breaking. "He took it." Tessa's camera hovered near her cheek. "She can't prove anything," Tessa murmured for the recording. Grant leaned in, soft enough to sound caring. "Lena, stop. Let them help. You're exhausted." Exhausted, unstable, dangerous. Words that stuck like tar. Martinez tried to speak. "We have footage, Union Station, case ID." The clipboard woman cut him off. "Until parentage is verified, we treat this as a child safety hold," she said. "The infant needs evaluation. No one is arresting anyone. We're separating for now." Lena clutched Miles tighter. "No, please. He's breastfeeding. He needs me." The medic stepped forward, gentle but firm. Webb nodded to hotel security and 2 guards angled in, blocking Lena's path. The officer held out his hands. "Ma'am, I need you to cooperate." Miles began to cry, thin, panicked. Lena's arms refused to open. Then Grant said the quiet sentence meant only for her. "Fight, and they'll say you're unfit." Her hands went numb. She let the medic take Miles, the scarf sliding away like a promise unraveling. The baby disappeared into the hotel's side corridor, the clipboard woman following. Outside, the Chicago wind slammed her in the face again. Daniel's SUV was gone, pulled away to protect his image or because he'd been forced back on stage. In the cold, Lena watched the lobby doors close like a verdict. Her phone finally caught signal. One new email from St. Bridget's HR. Due to recent events impacting patient trust, your employment is terminated effective immediately. She sank onto the curb beside the loading dock, shaking, listening to the distant music of the gala, realizing she had lost her baby's papers, her job, and the one place she'd felt safe. All in one night. A shadow fell over her. Someone crouched beside her and said, "Lena Parker, I'm Dr. Callahan. I saw everything, and I saved what they missed." Dr. Renee Callahan crouched beside Lena on the curb like the cold didn't matter. Up close, she looked early 50s, calm eyes, steady hands, the kind of woman who had made hard decisions in loud rooms for a living. "You're Lena Parker," she said gently, not as a question. "And that baby is Miles." Lena blinked through tears. "They took him. They took his papers. I can't even prove he's mine." Renee shook her head once. "You don't have to prove your love. You have to prove their manipulation." She pulled off one glove and held out her phone. "I saved what they missed." On the screen was a short clip from Union Station. Grant's hand clamped on Lena's tote strap, his mouth close to her ear. The angle was different from the security feed, tighter, clearer. Renee had filmed it herself, standing near the coffee kiosk with a paper cup in hand, looking like any other commuter. "You recorded him?" Lena whispered. "I'm an ER pediatrician," Renee said. "I don't trust he said, she said. I trust timestamps." She swiped again. A second file opened. Hotel lobby footage pulled from an email thread. "Director Webb forwarded this to my hospital account so it couldn't disappear. This is Tessa Vaughn handing your bag to Grant, clear as day." Lena's breath caught. "Will anyone care?" Renee's voice stayed even. "I care. And Martinez cares. And Webb cares because liability makes people honest." She nodded toward the service entrance where Officer Halverson stood talking to Martinez. "Police are obligated to take a report when there's documented harassment, and CPS is obligated to consider coercion when the concerned parent is caught staging a scene." Lena's hands trembled. "He has the birth certificate." Renee reached into her purse and pulled out a slim folder. Inside were printed screenshots, Grant's threatening texts, the photo he sent of the birth certificate, and the subject line of the draft emergency custody petition Daniel had shown earlier. "I called a colleague," Renee added. "Family attorney, pro bono intake. Her name is Marcia Denton. She's on her way, and she's bringing a notarized affidavit template for witnesses." Lena stared at the folder like it was oxygen. "Why are you doing this?" Renee's expression softened, but her spine stayed straight. "Because I watched a crowd treat a mother like a criminal, while the real danger wore a suit. And because your baby was hypothermic until you protected him." From inside the hotel, a medic stepped out and spoke quietly to Officer Halverson. Lena caught only two words: stable and observation. Renee squeezed Lena's shoulder. "You're not alone now. But we move smart. We move fast." Then Renee's phone buzzed with a new message from Webb. "You need to see what Grant just handed the officers. He forged her signature." Renee pulled Lena to the side of the loading dock, away from the revolving door and the curious faces pressing to watch. "Caroline says he handed officers a form with your signature," she murmured. "If it's forged, that's not just ugly. That's criminal." Officer Halverson met them under the awning, his breath fogging in the cold. He held a clipboard with a single page clipped on top: temporary consent to transfer custody. At the bottom was a looping signature that looked like Lena's name, but the curves were wrong. Too smooth. Too confident. Lena's real signature was shaky these days, cramped from cold nights and exhaustion. "I didn't sign that," Lena said. Her voice surprised her, steady, sharp. Halverson's eyes narrowed. Then I need a sample, right now. He handed her a pen and a blank sheet. Her hand trembled, but she wrote her name twice, slowly, the way she used to sign medication logs at the clinic. The difference was obvious. Martinez stepped in with his tablet. Union Station Case 1D is active, he said. Timestamp shows Holloway grabbing her tote. The city server has it, and I shared it to the hotel network. Caroline Webb appeared in the service doorway, face tight. Our lobby cameras show Vaughn removing the tote from Ms. Parker's shoulder, she said, then handing it to Mr. Holloway near the ballroom entrance. I've locked the footage. It can't be deleted without an audit trail. Renee opened her folder and laid out screenshots like a surgeon laying instruments. Grant's threat texts, his photo of the birth certificate on a marble counter, and the draft emergency petition dated before the police arrived. Then she added her own phone video from Union Station, close enough to catch his jaw moving as he hissed at Lena. A woman in a long coat hurried up, heels clicking fast on wet concrete. Marcia Denton, she said, flashing a bar card. Family law. Renee called. Marcia took one look at the forged form and exhaled through her teeth. Okay, we build a clean chain, she said. Officer, I want that document photographed in place, logged, then bagged. Martinez, email the case link to my secure address. Webb, I need your access log showing who entered the A/V closet and when. Lena swallowed hard. Will this get my baby back? Marcia met her eyes. It gets you heard. And once we show coercion, theft, and forgery, the Concerned Father Act collapses. From inside the hotel, a nurse pushed a bassinet past the glass doors. Miles inside, bundled, stable, but out of Lena's reach. Lena's knees threatened to buckle again. Renee caught her elbow. One more step, she whispered. We're almost there. Marcia's phone buzzed with a message from Webb. We found audio. Grant told Vaughn to make her sign or take the baby. Marcia didn't waste time arguing with Grant's father label. She went straight for what the law could prove tonight. Officer, she said, tapping the forged consent form with a gloved finger, this document is the centerpiece of his entire stunt. If it's forged, then everything else is theater. Halverson nodded once. We'll run it. Marcia turned the page over, pointing to a faint header line. See that? This form was printed on hotel letter stock, not brought from home, which means someone here generated it. She looked at Webb. Do you have printer logs? Webb's mouth tightened. Yes. Time, user login, device ID. Good, Marcia said. Now pair that with the AV closet access log. Vaughn tried to enter the closet, correct? Webb nodded again. With a guest badge that didn't match our list. Renee stepped closer, holding her phone like a weapon. And we have audio, she said. She played the clip Webb had sent. Grant's voice, low and sharp, clear enough to chill the spine. Make her sign or take the baby. Lena flinched, but Marcia steadied her with a look. That right there is coercion, Marcia said. Not concern. Coercion. Grant's story depended on two things, that Lena looked unstable and that he looked official. Marcia dismantled the second part in one sentence. Officer, a birth certificate is not a custody order, she said. And unless he has a court order or a signed acknowledgement of paternity on file, he cannot demand a transfer tonight. He can claim, he can perform, but he can't override the mother without process. Halverson's eyes sharpened. Do we know if he has an order? Martinez lifted his tablet. Nothing in the system under his name. No custody order, no protective custody authorization. Marcia nodded. Then his only move was intimidation, public pressure, CPS threats, and a forged consent. That's why he staged it at a gala with cameras. Not for the baby. For the crowd. Lena's breath shook. So what do I do? Marcia leaned in, voice firm, almost gentle. You stop reacting and start documenting. You're not powerless. Renee squeezed Lena's shoulder. Miles is stable. They can't justify keeping him from you if the hold was triggered by fraud. Halverson exhaled and gestured to his partner. We're going back inside. We're separating parties and collecting devices. Ms. Denton, you're coming. Marcia slid the folder into Lena's hands. Keep this. Every screenshot, every timestamp. When we walk into that ballroom, we don't argue. We present. And as the lobby doors opened, Marcia said, Tonight, he loses his stage because we're taking the microphone back. Lena's first instinct was still to run back into the dark where nobody could point, nobody could label her, nobody could take her child with a clipboard and a polite smile. But Marcia Denton didn't let her retreat. Listen to me, Marcia said, voice low and firm. Grant wins when you shrink. He built his whole plan on one picture, you shaking, him calm. Lena swallowed, staring through the glass doors at the lobby where the gala music drifted like nothing mattered. They already took Miles, she whispered. What else can he take? Marcia opened the folder and slid the proof into a clean sequence like a courtroom timeline. The Union Station case ID, Renee's phone video, the hotel camera still of Tessa handing over the tote, the printer log note Webb promised, the audio clip, make her sign or take the baby, and the forged consent form beside Lena's real signature samples. What else? Marcia repeated. Your voice, your dignity, your future? And you don't hand those over because a man threatens CPS. Renee stepped closer. Miles is stable, she said. Medical can't justify keeping him once the hold is tied to fraud. Officer Halverson returned with his partner, speaking quietly to Webb. Webb nodded once and said, We're pulling Vaughn's access badge and preserving her device footage. She can't walk out with anything. Lena felt something shift inside her, small, sharp, solid. Not hope yet, something harder. A decision. No more private rooms, Lena said, surprising herself. No more forms. No more talking it out. He only speaks when there's a crowd because he's performing. Marcia's eyes stayed on her. Good. Say it again. Lena lifted her chin. I'm done begging. Daniel appeared at the edge of the awning, Emma at his side. His face looked tight with anger and guilt. Lena, he said quietly, I can get the ballroom to stop filming. I can get the mic cut. Lena met his gaze. Don't cut it, she said. I need it. Emma stepped forward, clutching the scarf that had warmed Miles. Can I see him? She asked, voice trembling. You will, Lena promised, then turned to Halverson. I want my baby brought to a public space with you present. I want the nurse to state his condition out loud, and I want the forged form noted on record. Halverson nodded slowly. We can do that. Marcia handed Lena the folder. It felt heavier than paper, like a spine. We walk in, Marcia said, and we don't argue feelings. We present facts. Witness, video, audio, logs. Lena took one breath, then another, and straightened her shoulders like she was putting her old badge back on. Then let's go where he feels strongest, she said. With the evidence folder pressed to her chest, Lena stepped toward the ballroom doors as Grant's voice rose over the speakers, calling her name like a verdict. Webb led them into a small banquet prep room behind the ballroom, linen racks, spare centerpieces, a rolling cart of water pitchers. It wasn't pretty, but it was private and close enough to the stage to strike fast. 2 minutes, Webb said. Then I'm freezing the main doors. No one leaves until officers finish. Lena set the evidence folder on a table and forced her hands to stop shaking. Renee handed her a bottle of water. Sip, she said. Not for comfort, so your voice won't crack. Marcia flipped the folder open and reorganized it with ruthless clarity, sliding colored tabs into place. "We don't tell a story," she warned. "We prove a timeline." Tab 1, Union Station, City Server Case ID, Timestamp, Grant grabbing the tote. Tab 2, Renee's phone video, close angle, his mouth at Lena's ear, the threat. Tab 3, Hotel Still, Tessa handing the tote to Grant. Tab 4, Printer Log, Hotel Letter Stock, user login, exact minute the form was created. Tab 5, Audio, make her sign or take the baby. Tab 6, Forged Consent, beside Lena's fresh signature sample. Tab 7, the texts and the birth certificate photo proving possession and intimidation. Martinez tested his tablet connection. "Hotel AV is patched," he said. "If Webb gives the signal, I can route the clip to the ballroom projector." Lena stared at herself in the prep room mirror, barely recognizing the woman from the bench. Her cheeks were still red from wind, hair pulled back too tight, eyes exhausted. Webb opened a closet and tossed her a simple black blazer, lost and found, clean, plain. "Wear it," Webb said. "People listen to a jacket." Lena slid it on. The shoulders were a little broad, but it made her stand straighter. Renee tucked Emma's scarf into Lena's arm like a symbol instead of a rescue blanket. Daniel stepped in with Emma beside him. His face was set. "They've got Grant at the mic again," he said. "He's framing you as unstable. He's pushing donors to protect the baby." Marcia looked at Lena. "You say 3 sentences. Only 3, she instructed. Name, relationship, denial of the lie. Then we hand the floor to evidence and witnesses." Lena nodded, throat tight. "My name is Lena Parker. I am Miles's mother. I did not kidnap my child." Officer Halverson appeared at the door. "Nurse is bringing the infant to the side aisle," he said. "Condition will be stated out loud." Lena gripped the folder until her knuckles ached. The ballroom lights pulsed through the crack under the door, and Grant's voice carried like a sermon. Then Webb opened the ballroom door, and the projector screen flickered as Martinez cued the Union Station clip. Grant was mid-speech when the ballroom projector flickered. His confident smile froze as the screen filled with Union Station footage, sharp, time-stamped, undeniable. The room went silent in the way it only does when a lie is caught on camera. On screen, Grant's hand clamped down on Lena's tote strap. His mouth moved close to her ear. Lena's shoulders flinched. The footage paused on his face. Martinez's voice carried from the side aisle. "Case ID generated, uploaded to city server, chain of custody preserved." A murmur rolled through the donors. Heads turned. Phones kept recording, but now they were pointed at Grant. Marcia stepped forward beside Officer Halverson, holding the folder like it was a verdict. "This is not a kidnapping," she said. "It's coercion, theft of documents, and forgery, committed in this hotel." Webb appeared at the A/V station, calm and hard. "My lobby cameras show Ms. Vaughn removing Ms. Parker's tote," she said, then handing it to Mr. Halloway. "Time-stamped, logged, preserved." Tessa's smile cracked for the first time. She tried to slip backward, but hotel security blocked her path. A nurse wheeled Miles' bassinet to the side aisle, speaking clearly for everyone. "Infant Miles is stable. Mild hypothermia resolved. He was warmed and monitored. He is safe." Lena stepped into the open space, blazer on, evidence folder pressed to her chest. She didn't plead. She didn't tremble. "My name is Lena Parker," she said into the microphone Marcia handed her. "I am Miles's mother. I did not kidnap my child." Grant lunged for the mic. Halverson's hand stopped him. "Sir, step back." Marcia held up 2 sheets side by side. "This is the consent you provided," she said. "And these are Ms. Parker's signatures taken moments ago. Not a match." She nodded to Halverson. "Your report will note the discrepancy." Grant's face flushed. He pivoted, voice rising, desperate. "She's homeless. She's unfit. Renee cut in like a blade. "I treated children for 25 years, she said. "Unfit is a parent who uses CPS as a threat and stages a public scene to control a mother." The room shifted. People who had stared at Lena now stared at Grant with something colder than judgment. Disgust. Halverson spoke into his radio. "Detain Grant Holloway for suspected forgery and theft. Detain Tessa Vaughn for suspected evidence tampering." Grant's eyes darted, calculating exits. Then he made his last move. He grabbed the bassinet handle and yanked it toward himself, trying to use Miles as his shield. And as Miles' cry pierced the ballroom, Grant shouted, "If I can't win, no one takes him from me." Grant's hands never made it 2 feet. Officer Halverson hooked his arm, another officer secured the bassinet, and the nurse rolled Miles back behind the stage curtains. The ballroom erupted. Some people shouting, others crying, most simply stunned that the concerned father had just tried to use a newborn as leverage. "Sir, you are being detained," Halverson said, snapping cuffs onto Grant's wrists. When Grant twisted to glare at Lena, Webb stepped between them. "Cameras stay on," she told her A/V tech. "Every second is archived." Tessa Vaughn tried to slip out, phone clutched like a lifeline, but hotel security blocked her path and Martinez collected her device as evidence. Marcia Denton spoke to the crowd one last time, calm as a courtroom. "You witnessed a staged coercion," she said. "You also witnessed the truth being proven. Please stop recording the mother and start recording accountability." Daniel Price returned to the microphone, face pale but steady. "Tonight my event was hijacked," he said, "but it also revealed something important. Dignity does not depend on a bank account." He apologized publicly to Lena, then instructed his foundation director to cover Miles's hospital bills and arrange a temporary apartment through a vetted family shelter partner. No strings, no NDA, no control. Within hours, Marcia secured an emergency protective order barring Grant from contacting Lena or the child. 2 weeks later, the court reviewed the hotel footage, the Union Station case file, and the forged consent form. Grant was charged for theft and forgery, and a judge ordered supervised visitation only, contingent on counseling and compliance. The judge also referred Tessa's conduct to the state licensing board. Lena held Miles on the courthouse steps as Dr. Callahan signed an affidavit and hugged her like a sister. That night, Lena unlocked the door to a small, clean apartment, set Miles in a safe bassinet, and finally slept without listening for threats. 3 months later, St. Bridget's reversed its termination after Marcia's letter and the public record cleared Lena's name. Lena chose a different path anyway. Renee helped her land a position in the pediatric unit, steady hours and benefits. On Sundays, Lena sat in the back row of her mother's church, and when her mother finally reached for Miles, she whispered, "I'm sorry I believed the rumors." If you're a woman feeling cornered, remember this. Document, speak up, and accept help that comes with respect, never help that demands your silence. Ka hợp lý về DNA triệu view. Có bằng chứng sớm, camera, timestamp, audio. Có nhân chứng uy tín, bác sĩ, an ninh. Phản công công khai trước đám đông và karma rơi đúng nơi. Kết cũng đóng được các nút cảm xúc, nhục đến sợ, đến cô đơn, đến quyết tâm, đến hy vọng, đến công lý, đến ấm áp. Nhưng để hợp lý 100% theo logic đời thực, đặc biệt là phần pháp lý, bạn nên chỉnh vài điểm nhỏ cho chặt hơn. Within hours, xin protective order. Thực tế nhiều nơi có emergency order nhanh, nhưng nên nói rõ, that night Next morning, Marcia filed an emergency petition. The judge granted a temporary protective order within 24 hours. Nhẹ thật hơn. Charged trong 2 tuần. Việc bị còng tay, gạch chéo, đưa về đồn có thể ngay tối đó, nhưng file charges tùy quận có thể vài ngày đến vài tuần. Bạn có thể viết, He was arrested on suspicion. The DA filed charges 2 weeks later after reviewing footage. Hợp lý hơn. Bệnh viện giao bé lại. Bạn đã có nurse tuyên bố stable, tốt, nhưng thêm một câu. With the hold triggered by fraud, CPS cleared immediate reunification with the mother on scene. Thế là kín kẽ. St. Bridget's reversed termination. Phần này hợp cảm xúc nhưng nên có cầu nối. After a formal review, plus attorney letter, plus police report. Nếu muốn chắc hơn. They offered reinstatement. Lena declined and took the pediatric unit job. Daniel, quỹ trả viện phí. Rất hợp gu 50 cộng, công lý cộng chữa lành.
Nhưng để tránh cảm giác giải quyết bằng tiền quá nhanh, bạn thêm Through a documented hardship grant program, approved by board, no NDA. Làm nó công bằng và sạch. Hậu quả cho phản diện rõ hơn. Để đã hơn, thêm 1 đến 2 dòng. Grant removed from charity board. Workplace investigation. Restraining order served publicly. Không cần dài, chỉ để karma landing. Tóm lại, ending của bạn đã hợp lý và thỏa mãn. Chỉ cần chỉnh timeline pháp lý, cộng quy trình CPS để chéo bệnh viện, cộng hậu quả của grant vạch chéo Tessa, rõ thêm chút là đinh hơn. Nếu bạn muốn, mình có thể viết lại part 20 phiên bản Tight Legal Realism. Vẫn khoảng 400 từ, vẫn ấm áp, vẫn công lý, nhưng chặt hơn ở các điểm trên. So, that's the story, fully closed. And hey, if you are still here with me right now, that means something in Lena's fight touched your heart in a real way.
Here's the life lesson I want you to take with you. Dignity isn't something you earn by looking perfect. It's something you protect by telling the truth, documenting what's real, and refusing to be bullied into silence. People like Grant don't win because they're stronger. They win because they isolate you, confuse the crowd, and make you doubt your own worth. But the moment Lena stopped begging and started building facts, timestamps, witnesses, clear proof, everything flipped. That's not just drama. That's a roadmap for real life. Keep receipts, keep records, speak calmly, and ask for help from people who respect you. And here's the healing proof, straight from self-interest philosophy. Rational self-interest isn't selfishness. It's self-respect. You're allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to say, I will not pay for peace with my dignity. Because when you protect yourself, you protect your children too. If this story stayed with you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories where truth wins and hearts